In 1997, WCW booked a tag team match featuring the Outsiders, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, against Ric Flair and Roddy Piper. The plan was simple: keep the match light, avoid taking big risks, and save the heavy action for their pay-per-view showdown at the Great American Bash. But once the bell rang, things didn't go according to plan. Piper, known for his fiery personality, went into business for himself. He ignored the agreed strategy, pushed the pace, and disrupted the flow of the match. Nash, who prided himself on professionalism, was frustrated at being made to look weak in front of a live television audience. Backstage, Scott Hall pointed out that the performance had damaged Nash's aura, and that was enough to push him over the edge. Diesel versus King Mabel, a dangerous SummerSlam. In the summer of 1995, Kevin Nash, then performing as Diesel, was carrying the WWF Championship during a transitional period for the company. Hulk Hogan had left, Bret Hart was stepping back from the main spotlight, and Vince McMahon was searching for larger-than-life villains to put opposite Diesel. With few credible challengers available, the company took a gamble by elevating King Mabel to the main event of SummerSlam. On paper, it gave Diesel a new threat, but behind the curtain, many felt Mabel wasn't ready. He had size and presence, but his reputation for being reckless in the ring made veterans uneasy. Those fears were confirmed in their brief 9-minute main event. Midway through the contest, Mabel landed an awkward splash on Nash's back, coming down with his full weight. For a frightening moment, Diesel couldn't feel his legs, a sensation that sparked panic both for him and for those watching backstage. Though Nash gutted it out and finished the match to retain his championship, the scare stayed with him for years. Later, Nash reflected that it was one of those reminders of how fragile careers could be. Wrestling, he explained, is a business built on trust. Every performer relies on their opponent not just to deliver a compelling match, but also to keep them safe. When that trust is broken, whether by carelessness or inexperience, the consequences can change lives in seconds. For Nash, that night with Mabel underlined why chemistry and safety in the ring matter as much as charisma or crowd reactions. The Ultimate Warrior, a relationship built on disdain. If there was one wrestler Nash could never bring himself to respect, it was the Ultimate Warrior. Their history together stretched beyond televised matches and deep into personal interactions that only fueled Nash's disdain. In the early 1990s, Nash bought a membership at a gym Warrior owned, expecting at least casual respect between two industry peers. But instead, Warrior went out of his way to avoid him, slipping out back doors whenever Nash arrived. One day, Nash decided to address the bizarre behavior, walking up during a workout to ask directly if there was a problem. Warrior brushed him off with a nervous, "No," but the incident only grew stranger later. When Nash returned to his car, he found a 2-page handwritten letter from Warrior tucked under his windshield wiper. The message praised Nash as a true warrior, an odd attempt at approval that came across more like performance art than genuine connection. Alongside the letter were a couple of unexpected gifts, which only made the entire interaction stranger. From that moment, Nash decided Warrior was unpredictable and not someone he could take seriously. That impression hardened when Vince McMahon later asked Nash, who was preparing to leave WWF in 1996, to lose his final matches to Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, and Warrior. Nash agreed without hesitation to do business for Michaels and Taker, but when it came to Warrior, he flatly refused. If he wants the win, he can earn it in a real fight, Nash would later recall saying. Years afterward, when Warrior arrived in WCW with great fanfare, Nash's concerns were validated in spectacular fashion. Warrior's infamous 25-minute debut promo was rambling, confusing, and widely mocked, and it became a symbol of WCW's creative excesses. The two never had to wrestle, which Nash considered a blessing. Their mutual dislike resurfaced years later when Warrior criticized Nash publicly, and Nash responded with sarcastic humor. For Nash, Warrior embodied everything he disliked about the business: an erratic personality who commanded attention without showing the professionalism or humility to back it up. Goldberg. Ending the streak, few moments in WCW history are debated as fiercely as the night Goldberg's legendary undefeated streak came to an end at Starrcade 1998. For over a year, Goldberg had been built as the unstoppable juggernaut, steamrolling opponents and becoming WCW's hottest attraction. Fans adored him, and his undefeated record was treated as sacred. Nash, who by then was a central figure in WCW's main event scene, respected Goldberg as a man, but never fully bought into his in-ring ability. In interviews, Nash often described Goldberg as one of the kindest, most down-to-earth people he had ever met. But professionally, he felt Goldberg had been pushed too quickly without mastering the art of ring psychology. He compared Goldberg's rise to Steve Austin's, noting that while both had charisma and crowd connection, Austin had the in-ring storytelling to back it up. Still, when WCW booked Nash to end the streak, he followed through, delivering a jackknife powerbomb after outside interference and handing Goldberg his first loss. To this day, many fans blame Nash for derailing WCW's biggest star, accusing him of using backstage influence to put himself over. Nash has always denied this. He clarified that he wasn't even head booker at the time, taking on that role months later. In his view, the finish, with interference from Scott Hall, was designed to protect Goldberg's aura and create a new storyline. To prove the point, Nash vacated the championship just days later, hardly the action of a man hungry to hold on to the spotlight. Yet no amount of explanation could silence critics who believed the streak should never have ended the way it did. Looking back, Nash admits the aftermath didn't help anyone. WCW's momentum dipped, Goldberg lost mystique, and Nash himself looked worse in the long run. "I looked like the biggest fool of all," he once said. For Nash, the lesson was clear. Sometimes doing the job as booked can still leave everyone worse off if the bigger creative picture isn't right. The Rock, a new locker room sheriff. When Nash, Scott Hall, and Hulk Hogan returned to WWF in 2002 as the NWO, they expected a hero's welcome backstage, or at least the same deference they had once commanded in the 1990s. Instead, they found a locker room that had changed entirely, with The Rock standing tall as its new sheriff. From the moment the NWO appeared at No Way Out, The Rock set the tone. On live television, he mocked them relentlessly, refusing to play into their mystique. In one memorable segment, he looked Nash in the eye and called him Big Daddy Bitch, drawing huge laughs from the audience. Vince McMahon had instructed the NWO members not to respond or go off script, which forced Nash to stand silently as The Rock verbally dismantled him. For Nash, who had once been a dominant presence backstage, the experience was humiliating. Privately, he bristled at the dynamic and pushed back against The Rock, creating an undercurrent of tension. Nash later admitted that his attitude in 2002 wasn't his finest moment. He wasn't bitter at The Rock personally, but frustrated at feeling like an outsider in a company he had once helped shape. Time eventually healed the friction, and Nash conceded that The Rock was only doing what any top star would, marking his territory and protecting his position. Still, the episode served as a stark reminder that wrestling's hierarchy evolves quickly, and yesterday's power players can become today's targets. The Vanilla Midgets controversy. Among Kevin Nash's most infamous contributions to wrestling lingo is the phrase vanilla midgets, a term he used to describe smaller wrestlers in WCW, such as Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Eddie Guerrero. At the time, Nash believed main event stars needed a look imposing, projecting the aura of superheroes that fans would pay to see headline major events. To him, the technical brilliance of smaller wrestlers was admirable, but not what drew the masses. In later years, Nash clarified that he used the phrase provocatively, mostly to rile up fans and generate reactions, rather than as a deeply held belief. But for many, especially Guerrero, the words cut deep. In his autobiography, Guerrero labeled Nash one of the most arrogant figures in WCW, accusing him of blocking opportunities for smaller wrestlers. The resentment lingered, and fans echoed Guerrero's frustrations, seeing Nash as emblematic of the size-obsessed booking philosophy that hurt WCW in the long run. Yet history would prove the tide was shifting. When Guerrero, Benoit, and others eventually rose to main event status in WWE, they showed that fans could connect just as strongly, if not more so, to underdogs who weren't giants. To his credit, Nash softened his stance later in life, acknowledging that the business had evolved and that performers of all sizes could succeed. He may have coined a dismissive phrase, but he also lived long enough to see that philosophy turned upside down. Samoa Joe, TNA's turning point. By 2007, Nash had transitioned into a veteran role in TNA wrestling, working behind the scenes to mentor younger talent while still competing occasionally. One such moment came at the Turning Point pay-per-view, where Nash was scheduled to team with Samoa Joe and Scott Hall against Kurt Angle's faction. At the last minute, however, Hall pulled out, reportedly citing illness. Though many suspected ongoing personal struggles were the true reason, the absence infuriated Samoa Joe, who was told by management to address the issue live during the show. What followed was one of the most unfiltered promos in TNA history. Joe blasted Hall for letting down the company and accused veteran part-timers of showing up only for paychecks, while praising the full-time roster as the real heart of the promotion. Standing next to Joe in the ring, Nash was blindsided. He had no idea Joe was about to unload, and the words put him in an uncomfortable position. Backstage, Nash confronted Joe immediately, asking if Vince Russo or Jeff Jarrett had scripted the promo. When Joe admitted it was all his own, Nash's temper flared. Feeling publicly undermined, Nash reacted physically, an incident that left the locker room buzzing. The next day, Joe stood in front of the roster and apologized directly to Nash, acknowledging that his anger had gotten the best of him. Though the issue was eventually resolved, it reflected the generational clash between young wrestlers eager to prove themselves and veterans protective of their legacy. For Nash, it was another reminder that wrestling is as much about communication and mutual respect as it is about the matches themselves. Kevin Nash, flawed but honest. Looking at Kevin Nash's career, it's clear that his legacy is not only about championships or star power, but also about the conflicts that followed him. Time and again, Nash found himself in the middle of situations where egos, expectations, and professional standards collided. Sometimes he let his pride lead him into regrettable choices. Other times he stood firm in defense of what he thought was right. What makes Nash unique, however, is his willingness to admit when he got it wrong. He has described himself as making poor decisions, acknowledged when he acted like a bully, and shown the humility to laugh at his own mistakes. That honesty, combined with his natural charisma and sharp humor, has kept him relevant long after his days in the ring. Whether fans view him as a gatekeeper who held others back or as a veteran who told hard truths, Kevin Nash remains one of wrestling's most compelling storytellers. His career, complete with triumphs, controversies, and lessons learned, stands as proof that the battles outside the ring can be just as defining as the ones inside it.